folks, welcome back to Indaba Conversation. This is Chris once again. Hey folks, welcome back once again to continuing coverage of South Africa's 2021 municipal elections. This time we're speaking to the mayoral candidate for the city of Ekurhuleni in the East Rand in Gauteng, and we're going to talk to her in just a moment. Get her on the camera here. We're going to talk about this race, which is very competitive, an opportunity potentially for the Democratic Alliance to wrest control from the ANC, which has controlled this municipality since it was first organized about 20 years ago. And with that, if I can get my guest to come on the channel, I think her camera's off at the moment. There it is. All right. So this is none other than the candidate for Ekurhuleni's mayoral race. And this is now, I'm going to apologize in advance because I'm going to mess up names here. I do my best. I speak 6 languages, but not 160. So I have to do my best. But I believe we pronounce your given name as Refiloe. And then this is the part I'm going to mess up because I think French missionaries had something to do with butchering this name. So it's Nt'sekhe. I don't know how close that was. Nt'sekhe. All right. My humble.
But you were close, Chris. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Listen, I got to be honest with you. I'm actually more excited about you coming on the program than I've been about most of my interviews because you are in a municipality that is ripe for lack of a better word, I'll say poaching from the ruling ANC. It is a place that's ripe for poaching. Now, a lot of people have no idea what we're talking about. If you're not in South Africa, you know what we're talking about, but you do. If you've gone to South Africa from outside the country, you've most likely landed at OR Tambo Airport. And where does it sit? Right in the heart of your municipality.
But you know the problem, Chris, is people don't actually know that. They think they're landing in Johannesburg. So it's a poor marketing because people, even on your ticket, it says JNB instead of AKU. It's one of the things that obviously I plan to fix immediately because I am a marketer by background as well.
Really?
So people globally must know that they are landing in Ekurhuleni, not Johannesburg.
Well, that's a fair point, but people really think it's Joburg. It's actually outside there. It's quite a huge town. We're talking 3.3, maybe 3.4 million residents in that municipality. So let me ask you this question. The John Steenhuisen announced that you would be the candidate for mayor back in late August for the municipality. I'm assuming you were excited to hear about that your name was going to go at the top of that list, and you're probably looking forward to a chance to wrest control from the ANC and do something to improve life for the residents of that municipality.
Yeah, look, this is third time I've been asked to stand as a mayor, but this is the time that I've decided that I wanted to serve and take on the position as I was asked to serve. So it's an honor to actually have accepted the role of being a mayoral candidate, to be honest. But I really think the ground is fertile. We have a big opportunity as the Democratic Alliance to take over this municipality in the majority government, to be honest.
Well, and that's the key, isn't it? You know, a lot of people in the aftermath of the 2016 elections and the 2019 national elections talked a lot about the coalitions being the future of South Africa. Well, perhaps at the national level in 2024. But the reality is when it comes to local politics, as we saw play out in Nelson Mandela Bay, unfortunately, I think a brilliant mayoralship of Athol Trollip, who is, I know he's not with the party right now, but he's one of the people I found most interesting and one of the most amazing mayors. And then he was constantly fighting a rearguard action against keeping a coalition together because they couldn't get a majority. So at the local level, in my view, if you want to comment on this, you're welcome to. In my view, in South Africa, it's not about a coalition unless you're forced into it, unless you have no option. The vote is split, like maybe Joburg is going to be because of Herman Mashaba and Action SA. But it's really about getting 50+1 so you're not beholden to some other party or some minor actor so you can actually govern. Now, you can invite them to join your coalition if you got 50+1. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think I'm on, or is that probably the wrong approach? Maybe coalitions are the answer.
No, you're spot on, Chris. For me, the reason I want the 50+1 is because one, you'll be able to implement the manifesto without having, to sort of accommodate a coalition partner, and then also adjust the budgets accordingly to suit the promises that you made to the constituents when you were busy campaigning. And that's what I want for Ekurhuleni, because this city is so broken. A coalition government can actually detract us a little bit from fixing it if we have to go into it. Well, I am going all out, and I believe I can win with a 50%+1 majority.
Well, let me ask you this question. How's the campaigning going? Because the press haven't really spent a lot of time talking about Ekurhuleni. They've spent a lot more time talking about Cape Town and Durban and even Tshwane. So how is it going? Because we're not seeing a lot of coverage of the campaigns there in Ekurhuleni.
Yeah, I think the press is quite thin here in Ekurhuleni. We make do with social media and the media accounts that we've started. But the reality is, what I've seen on paper is not as horrifying as what I see on the campaign trail. The lack of service delivery. I'm Chris myself. I'm also a resident of this municipality, affected just as the residents are affected because I am a resident myself. But to go into places where, just to horrify you, I found sewage flowing backwards into somebody's bathtub, and it's a home where, see, I like your facial expression. It's a home where they actually had a disabled child, and how do you bath that child? I've seen situations where they've built. One of the most horrifying things is the amount of money that has gone to fruitless and wasteful expenditure. There's a 44 million rand facility that was supposed to be for light industrial facility. The community was not aware of it. It was open in 2019, but it's remained fallow. Nobody's using it and doesn't even have water. Yet we've got an unemployment rate of 39%. We've got over 1,000 power outages a day here in Ekurhuleni. Last week I had a picket to raise awareness of a power station that was supposed to be built for 70 million rand. Again, it's an open field with nothing really to show. A small structure, no bigger than a standard 3-bedroom house, and 70 million rand was spent on this thing. So the amount of fruitless and wasteful expenditure is actually shocking. And yet the city gets a clean audit from the Auditor General, but the clean audit is not people's lived experiences.
Yeah, well,
and that's what we need to wrestle out of the hands of the ANC to say, I feel like the people have been under, we say Mandela went to prison for 7 years, but Ekurhuleni feels like they've been under prison for 27 years of lack of service delivery. So I don't think even I or anybody can afford another 5 years of ANC, especially with the amount of money being wasted and lack of service delivery.
I don't think people can afford another 5 minutes of ANC rule. My goodness, they might ignore another insurrection in their party, breaking apart and leading to 100,000 looters destroying everything. So I don't think we can afford another 5 minutes. But, it's interesting you say 1,000 power outages a day. This is in the location where most of the world first discovers South Africa. If you've never been to South Africa, most likely the first time you land is in Ekurhuleni, right there at OR Tambo, and that's your introduction to South Africa. Of course, we have seen in the past some really horrific introductions, like a busload of elderly Dutch tourists who are pulled over by fake police who climb on the bus and then beat elderly people to rob them. That's a pretty unhealthy welcome to there. But power outages in a place that should be, in some respects, a glowing example of what South Africa is. I mean, when you have international rivals get there, the last thing you want them to see is to go to their hotel and there's no power, or to go to a restaurant and there's no lights because they can't eat. That's not to mention the lives and livelihoods of the 3.4 million residents of the city itself. That's pretty crazy, but I mean, this has become the norm. A lot of people have just accepted this over the past several years. I get the feeling and sense that maybe there's a turning point in this election and that more people might actually come out. We saw about 15 million actual voters, 14 plus million in the 2016 municipal elections, which they say was 60+%. But that's of those who were registered. Of the eligible voters, was down in the 30s. We'll probably see lower numbers, but I don't know. Are we going to see 12, 13, 14, 15 million of those 26 million come out? But do you get the sense that people are hot full, that they've had enough of this nonsense and that maybe they're going to come to the polls and vote because of that?
Absolutely. I mean, even if you look at ANC itself, they've had such a lot of fights with even picking candidates for the different wards in the municipality, which is like about 112 wards. They don't even have a mayoral candidate as we speak right now. And we are like a week away from an election and they don't have a mayoral candidate. I've been a mayoral candidate since the 23rd of August. So you're really seeing an organization that's torn within itself, because you've got two distinct factions of the ANC here fighting each other like crazy. But unfortunately, the people who birth the brand are the residents, because as the factions intensify, the service delivery worsens. And so these people we have been failed in this municipality. You saying Ekurhuleni is the first point where you land. Remember also for a long time, this is the biggest airport on the continent. You had to fly to South Africa before you fly to other parts of Africa. I used to work as a marketing manager for South African Airways a long time ago, and we used to call it Africa's warmest welcome, because you'd have to land in OR Tambo and then catch a connecting flight to Kenya, Ethiopia, and obviously those other countries have now wisened up and started their own airlines. So and this is a municipality that's supposed to be an industrial hub for the country, and yet we've got a lot of businesses that have literally abandoned ship. I've spoken a lot to, we've got a mining belt, we've got distilleries here who sometimes have no power out with the power outages or water outages, find themselves that they still have to have overhead costs. They still have to make sure that they meet the market demands of their products. And yet we have reservoirs that are incomplete, and they've shifted money towards PPE. And in South Africa, the minute you hear PPE, which is basically your masks and things, we know that was corruption that was exposed badly during this COVID pandemic that we're dealing with. And people are failing to build water reservoirs. We are a water scarce country. So we definitely and desperately need these water reservoirs to have been built.
Absolutely. In fact, that's two things about South Africa most people don't realize is that, number one, there's virtually no arable land. Only 12% of the surface area of South Africa is till cropped land because of the soil, because of the climate, because of the rainfall. And the second is it's a desperately water poor country. Especially given the population approaching 60 million now. So the activities taking place in Lesotho with the Highlands water projects are just as important, if not more important, to South Africans than they are to Lesotho, to people in Lesotho. But that is a real issue here, as you mentioned with distilleries. You got to have water to make those things. You can't make it out of thin air. Although I suppose if you sit on the coast of Namibia, you can evaporate some moisture, but you're not on the coast of Namibia, so you're kind of stuck with what you got. But the thing here is that when we talk about, let's talk about you very quickly here. So you come to the table, you're not exactly, oops, your mic has gone silent. Oh, there it is. So you mentioned the ANC doesn't even have a candidate. And so for yourself coming to the table, your party identified you as a candidate in August, but you were coming to this with some experience. It's not as if you're just walking into politics for the first time. You're a member of the provincial legislature there in Gauteng, and you're also, I believe, the deputy federal chair for your party, if I'm not mistaken. So you will bring some experience in politics, so you're ready to hit the ground running, assuming you become mayor after this election. Is that a fair statement?
I've already hit the ground running. Chris, I was a member of the South African Liberal Students Association, which is sort of like a baby party to the Democratic Alliance in 1995 when I turned 18. At the University of Cape Town. I've worked a bit in corporate sector, but since 2009, I was a national director for the Democratic Alliance, living in Kempton Park, which is part of Ekurhuleni, and I was a councillor from 2011 to 2014, and I currently serve in the provincial legislature, driving Ekurhuleni's issues in the provincial legislature. So I'm not a newbie at all. I've been pretty much involved with the political arena for pretty much my whole adult life, because if you've been in politics since you turned 18 and I'm now just turned 44, I don't know anything really except politics.
Well, I guess I don't have to worry about offending and asking a lady her age. She's just revealed it. So,
well, I'm not worried about my age.
Well, I'm with you. Same here. You always feel younger at heart than actually what the calendar probably tells you anyway, I would imagine. But no, there's a lot of comments coming in. People in the chat so far seem to say that you seem to be the right answer. Nt'sekhe is on the ball, hasn't missed a beat. She's banging the money thus far. Yeah, I know this lady would at the very least turn the rot and put Ekurhuleni back on a better path. Well, I mean, listen, not to undermine your position, because that's not at all. But honestly, as bad as things have been, almost anything would be an improvement. So, I mean, I think the sky's the limit. If you get in as mayor and the DA has majority control, you should have a great opportunity to make a lot of changes. Bearing in mind, of course, that funding and other resources often come from the national government, and it's got to work its way down. So you also don't control SAPs. That's a national competency. So people have to be realistic with expectations. But is it fair to say that if you were able to get a majority, that you think you'd have a good opportunity to make some turnarounds pretty quickly in some of the service sectors? I mean, like rubbish collection and fixing potholes and things like that.
Yeah, those are kind of like the quick wins, Chris. So for me, the quick wins, I mean, even some of the power outages, it's power outages because we've got Eskom, which we can't control, but because of poor maintenance of infrastructure, when we come back from load shedding and Eskom switches on, sometimes there's explosions or the infrastructure can't actually cope with the power. So we end up with power outages. So that's a quick fix. It's making sure you've got the right staff. I was talking earlier to a colleague that the municipality has probably about 12,000 staff members, but there's a vacancy rate of 4,000 employees, and these are funded positions. So we need to be filling these positions because in every department, is crucial. I mean, if I can give you an example, the electricity department, according to the the National Energy Regulator of South Africa, they made a recommendation to say Ekurhuleni should have 1,500 people in the energy department. Funded is 1,100. The department currently is sitting on 879. I'm not even a mayor yet, but as a mayoral candidate, I've gone on South African Institute of Electrical Engineers and find that there's over 1,000 registered electrical engineers who reside in Ekurhuleni, and I was able to invite them to a breakfast. Obviously, I could only see 30 because of still COVID protocols, but the response was outstanding to say, yes, they want to come on board, they want to work with us. But the problem is the municipality has been sidelining them. What I've also uncovered, which also shows you the problem, is 71.5% of our contracts in Ekurhuleni are given to companies outside of the municipality. So that's why those 1,000 odd electrical engineers and their consultancy have been bypassed for contractual work by the municipality. Some of them are people who are good at generation, some of them are good at distribution, and some of them are good at storage of electricity. And I've said to them, when we win government after the 1st of November, are you prepared to come into the municipality and partner with us and work with us? So those are quick wins. I'm not asking something that's far. I've already started the groundwork to say when we win, it's literally to put out an email to say, let's have another meeting and see how you plug in so we can refurbish substations, so we can make sure we've got parts in stores. I mean, sometimes the suburb will be out because there was no fuses in store. And when you speak to some of the engineers who've been my whistleblowers, they say to us, we're not allowed to buy parts until there's a power outage, which is poor management. We're working on a reactive basis versus proactive, where you keep parts in store so that when there's an outage, it doesn't take a day or two to find a fuse. You've already got those components in stores.
That's crazy.
So my philosophy is get back to basics. Let's get to a point where we're not working reactively. We're working proactively. So while I cannot mitigate against Eskom, but I can mitigate against the power outages that then follow when Eskom switches us back on. And as you know, DA governments have started looking at alternative energy sources because there was a promulgated Act 10 to say, get independent power producers on board. Stellenbosch, my sister municipality, has already passed a motion in council to do exactly that. And I can quote a couple of examples. George, another DRN municipality, has the only solar-powered airport in South Africa, and it generates so much electricity that they channel it to about 200 households near the airport. Kucha, another DA-run municipality, has got wind turbines. I'm looking at UK right now. They're using waste, our landfill sites are full. They're using waste to generate electricity. So we need to think out of the box and be innovative in how we make sure that we take Ekurhuleni away from its dependency from Eskom for energy, so that we can actually have more people coming to invest in Ekurhuleni versus the job shedding that we're probably going to do, because nobody will want to build a business where there's power outages, water outages, and the roads are pothole ridden, and the waste doesn't get collected and storage is running down the street, to name but a few. So we need to get to the basics of getting things right. And then long term, obviously, these alternative energy sources, we'd get into like a 15, 20 master plans of how do we move the municipality away from ESCOM dependency. I don't think the current administration is even thinking that way.
No, I seriously doubt they are. I mean, you've taken a pretty, what I think is a pretty rudimentary step, but an important one, just to reach out and find out who's out there, who can actually get the job done. And it begs the question, with 39% unemployment in Ekurhuleni, it begs the question, is the reason there's 4,000 vacancies because of the fact that there aren't qualified people? I suspect that's not the case. Is it because they're not ANC patronage puppies and part of the cadre system? That may be it. Or is it because they're minorities, Indians, whites, coloreds? What's the reason? If you have any idea, do we even have any?
I've looked at the problem and I found two particular responses or answers to it. One is because the municipality prefers to use tenders instead of building up skills in-house. So when you start building tenders, the problem with that is also impacts on finances, because tenderpreneurs inflate their prices because there has to be a kickback to the cadre who gave them the job. The second problem is the fact that if I was able to find the 1,000 odd electrical engineers, they do reside in the municipality, but there's just no will. So the funded positions I'm talking about, that 4,000 is funded in budget for positions. And if I could find them, they are there in the municipality. I've even found civil engineers. I just don't have the numbers because our stormwater drainage have not been maintained for the past 20 years. And so when we have rains, it's now the rain season. In fact, it looks like it's going to rain outside today. Our roads end up with pools, and then they get damaged because they don't go into the stormwater drainage and run through to the rivers and to the dams. And that water could even be gathered and cleaned up and used for something else. But we're not maintaining the infrastructure. We're not building new infrastructure. So if I have found electrical engineers, civil engineers, essential skills that are living and residing in this municipality, I think it's just a question of no will to actually do this, because it's easier to find incompetent contractors to do shoddy work in the municipality. They don't even understand the waybill of where your stormwater drainages are.
Well, there's a good point here Tony Nagy makes. He's from South Africa, but living in Canada now, and he says, and he's right about this, as a power engineer, load shedding does more damage to power plants, but also it does more damage to electronic devices, to tension lines, to distribution centers. This constant, flux back and forth is not healthy, and it really does a damage. And the thing that's really important here too, I think, Refiloe, is that the damage this does to productivity. And you alluded to that earlier, talking about the distilleries and other industrial operations going on in Ekurhuleni. It really has a terrible effect on productivity, has a terrible effect on cost of doing business, and it has a knock on it. It's not simply the power goes out. I mean, if the power goes out, then we lose vaccines that have to be refrigerated. And we lose medications that have to be refrigerated. We lose food. We lose this. We lose that. It's absolutely insane. And when the lights go out at night, it just makes it a nice, prime, juicy target for home invasions and for robberies and such, because there's not lighting out there so that people can spot those with nefarious intent. It goes on and on and on. The thing about this, about Ekurhuleni, is interesting when it comes to the town itself. It's a very diverse, ethnically mixed town. For people who might know a little bit about South Africa, you might look up there in the highveld, look at the East Rand, and go, "Oh, there'd probably be a lot of Sotho, maybe some Tswana and some Afrikaners there." But interestingly enough, Zulu is the most widely spoken language in your municipality, and followed by English, which is very interesting because English is actually only spoken by about 9% of South Africans as a first language. It's not even one of the top languages. And then Afrikaans comes along. So why is so many Zulus up there? Is it a consequence of settlement back in the day and maybe mining that took place? Or why so many Zulu living in Ekurhuleni? Because when you think of Zulu, you think of, KZN, you think of Durban, you think of where the Zulu home is at.
Yeah, well, I think the reality is Zulu is actually one of the most widespoken languages in the country, period.
It is. It's a top language. Yes, the first language.
Yeah, it is, when you look at vernacular languages. But Ekurhuleni, like you say, is very cosmopolitan. I'm actually a Sotho speaking person, but I do dab a little bit in Zulu, although I'm not fluent, but I can get away with the basic conversation.
All I can get away with is sawubona. That's it. That's it.
That's good. At least you're trying for somebody who's not based in South Africa. The effort is, appreciated. I speak a couple of languages here. Even Afrikaans, I'm not fluent, but I can get away with the basic conversation of where do I get this or whatever directions. But when you talk about things like our power outages, I've spoken to some of the distilleries. I've spoken to the guys on the mining belts. Imagine a distillery and they're busy doing manufacturing and their power goes off and things are still on the belt. And immediately that merchandise is actually destroyed as the power goes off, because it's not planned outages. The municipality had promised them that they will discuss outages with them, but they failed to even do the basic communication of saying, when there is outages, let's talk to business and see how we can mitigate and assist them. At least keep the residential areas out, but keep the industries on. But some of the guys have said to me, Refiloe, we've set with a point where we've had something like 70 hours of no electricity. And what that does is damages equipment that costs us millions of rands. Yes, we are insured, but it might take 2 weeks before we can replace that equipment. And we still have to manage overheads, because we're trying not to retrench anybody, because we know that people can't afford. I mean, it's a bad spiraling effect of a bad situation. So we need to get to a point where we arrest all these problems and start saying, that's why it's even important to look at this alternative energy sources, to say, if you could have a conversation to say to the distilleries, I remember when I had a meeting with some of them to say, why don't we look at the rooftops and see if we can bring in solar energy, even if it's initially just for yourself, before we look at extra production to put into the grid. And they are starting to think that way, but it's a very expensive exercise where they've thought they have electricity coming from Eskom and ultimately from the municipality. But nobody's given them a rebate to actually get off the grid themselves. And yet there is a promulgated amount that was sort of discussed at national to say, even for residential homes, if people start producing their own energy, they were supposed to get a 70,000, 75,000 rand benefit back to themselves. But municipalities are not even having the three-sphere conversation to say, how do we assist those who can to get off the grid so that those who need electricity are so much fewer? Because all they're looking at is how much money we can make of residents, but they're not looking at the long-term effects of not having electricity, which is job shedding. And ultimately, my worry now, Chris, is people immigrating out of the country who are able to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But that's what's been going on forever now, for 27 years.
Yeah, and we cannot afford to have people, especially because the people who immigrate are the people who are skilled. Yeah. There are people like me who say, you know what, Refiloe, you've got a master's degree, you've worked in corporate sector and marketing. I could probably find a job in Canada, in anywhere in the world, and even do virtual work because I have the skill set to do so. But I choose to stay home and fight for this country because I think there is another way. But it's also important that we also have a challenge in South Africa where our people are not politically literate. People were threatened in all the different elections that if you vote for another party outside of the ANC, you'll lose your RDP housing, you lose your grant, you lose your basic services, which are free. They'll make
you carry passes, apartheid will come back. Yeah.
Exactly. But what I started saying as I go on the campaign trail addressing the public, is start to say to them, you know, we took over Tshwane. Nobody lost their house. Nobody lost their RDP. Nobody lost their grant. And as you can see, these things are government. They're not owned by political party. All the political party does is manage those things. So it's a long conversation to have.
Or mismanage.
Correct. You know. But that's the challenge that we have when we go through the length and breadth. The more illiterate the community is, the more threatened they feel when ANC says to them, Gogo, you're going to lose your grant. You're going to be kicked out of your RDP house. You're going to lose your free basic water and electricity. So we need to have a long conversation because IEC indirectly has also sort of failed our people by failing to communicate what people's power is in the ability to vote.
Well, I would have to agree with that. The role of the Independent Electoral Commission isn't simply to conduct elections. It's also one of public information, to keep the public informed about what their rights are, how voting is, and what's going on. So I think they have failed, folks. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Chris White Africa on the Indaba Africa channel, part of the Indaba Broadcasting Network. It's Sunday, October 24th, and we are just days away from South Africa's consequential 2021 municipal elections. And I have here as a guest today a very interesting lady who is representing the Democratic Alliance and seeking the mayoral seat for the Metropolitan of Ekurhuleni, which, in case you don't know where that's at, Germiston, Boksburg, Kempton Park, OR Tambo. If you know those areas, then you know what I'm talking about. And it's none other than Refiloe Nt'sekhe. I'm going to get it wrong again. I got her surname wrong again, but she's smiling. She's very kind. I'll get it right eventually. We'll sit down. We'll have a braai sometime, have with Joel, and I'll get it right every time after that. But some very kind things coming in from people here.
Absolutely.
Some people coming in here with some very kind things to say. I said, you're the right person for this, and really, really nice things going on over here. But as we talk about this, let's shift a little bit, okay, from this conversation to prospects. Looking at the 2016, now I don't take into account the by-elections because I don't have that data, but 2016 election results saw the ANC come up with 109 seats, so they didn't have a majority. So they had to form a coalition just to maintain control. But the DA had 77 seats. So people might look at that and say 77, 109, that's tough. Folks, the ANC is beyond unpopular at this point. They have an internal civil war amongst themselves, which is splitting between the radical economic transformation crowd that backs Zuma and others and Ace Magashule, and you have the other side that's the technocrats, if you want to call them that, but I don't really think they are, with the Ramaphosa. I don't think Ramaphosa even has a side. I think he's just a figurehead on top of two factions, and he's not really part of either one. But you have an internal civil war going on in the ANC. Lots of people are just hot full. They've had enough of the ANC. They're tired of service delivery failures. And this is, I believe, an opportune time for an opposition party, particularly in Ekurhuleni, for the DA to gain. The ANC, if no other parties made any changes, if the ANC lost, I think, 14 seats and your party gained 18 seats, you would have a plurality. You'd have to gain 30 to get a majority. So what do you think the prospects are? I think you can become a plurality for sure in Ekurhuleni. Do you think you have a good chance to get that 50+1?
I really, really do, Chris, because I've gone into areas where normally when you complain as a black person, you're basically told you're a coconut, you're a
Wait. You're black? I'm just kidding. Please, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I can't help it. It reminds me of that movie, that Lethal Weapon, years ago when Danny Glover, they went into the South African consulate, if you ever saw it, and he asked the Afrikaner sitting there, he says, my friend wants to immigrate. Yes. And he goes, but you're black. Sorry. So anyway, I'm just having fun. I didn't mean to interrupt you. It was fun. So go ahead.
Yeah. So I've gone into communities where it was not sexy to be DA. And a case in point, I went into an area called Gauteng, and the day before I went in, the president was in the same community where they've had power outages for 5 months, people with electrical appliances now making fire outside to cook. And they were angry, and they were prepared to hear me the next day. But the day before, they'd actually booed the president out of the community. So this is the thing I'm finding on the ground. And it's not to say people are excited, but they're at least open to hearing what the DA is. And people are starting to say, because near Ekurhuleni is Midval, where we govern, and it's not even a metro municipality. It's a smaller municipality, but it's been rated as the best run municipality in Gauteng, the province. And people are starting to say, we want Midval to come to Ekurhuleni. If DA is the one that's going to give services, we've actually gotten to a point where we don't care whether you're black, white, pink, or purple, as long as we get service delivery. And when I go in, yes, on Twitter, I'll have trolls who will tell me, you're very intelligent, but you're in the wrong political party. Maybe you should be in the DA, and I'm in the ANC. And I'm like, no, I've never been a member of the ANC. I have no intentions of, because I know they're a party, a liberation movement, but they're not a party of government. And I think when I was studying political analysis in the 90s as a political philosophy student, I started realizing that the ANC was definitely had policies that were not going to give us economic freedom in this country. But when I looked at the DA's policies, then I realized this free market economy that we are chasing, this political party that puts individual rights as sacrosanct, this is the party that I want to go with. And I think growing up in that space where I changed from my own family. Remember, a lot of us as Black people, we all come from somewhere. My parents have been hardcore ANC, but it took me for my parents and my family to see the light. And today I will proudly say my family members vote DA because of me. So sometimes it takes a child to let parents see the light. And I understand where they came from, because obviously they grew up in the apartheid era. Liberation was important during their term. But now they are looking at, if you are a farmer, like my dad is an agricultural economist, my mother's a medical doctor. If you are looking at where this country needs to go, definitely ANC is not the right vehicle to take us to where we need to go. When you look outside of that, which party has a track record of growing the economy in South Africa? The DA stands out. In so many of the top 20 municipalities, the best run municipalities are governed by the Democratic Alliance.
Well, that's a true statement. Absolutely. Survey after survey just saw the out of order assessment, which is it's based on their own criteria, and it's oftentimes relied on some faulty data or non-data reported by some municipalities. But nonetheless, the out of order index, which News 24, which by the way, I have to say, I've called News 24 capture media for a long time, but I will have to give them credit. In the build up to this election, they've been doing some pretty darn good and objective news coverage of what's going on. I'm actually astounded at it. It's not perfect. No one's perfect, but they're doing a much better job than usual. But there's a couple things we should unpack here very quickly. You talk about being a Black South African. You know, one of the challenges for the Democratic Alliance has always been the lie, because it's a lie, and the I think the distortions and the bigotry against the Democratic Alliance. And I'm not defending; I'm just stating facts here. That it's the party of the whites. It's a white party, and that's utter nonsense. If you look at the majority, well, you're Black, but I mean, you could say someone say, well, you're just token Black. But the reality, especially after what I'm about to get to in a moment, but the reality is that the majority of people in the party are actually colored South Africans who are actually in the Democratic Alliance demographically. So I mean, that's just an outright lie to begin with. But then, as you point out, you're a Black woman. You're part of the DA. Now, a couple of years ago, after the disastrous 2019 results for the DA, which did not go well, there was a chance to go over 30%, and it went the other direction. Very unfortunate. We saw, of course, Mmusi Maimane leave the party, and then we saw Herman Mashaba resign and leave the party from Johannesburg. And a lot of talk was spread around whether they said it or other people said about it, but they said, well, basically the gist of the news cycle that came out of that, truth or not, either by them or not by them, was that they left because it's a racist party and the people in charge wouldn't let them do things. To which I say, Mmusi Maimane ran the party. So, I mean, I'm a little confused. I know there's a governing body and he has, you have executives, but how could you be the head of a party like that if you claim that, whether he did or didn't? And then Herman Mashaba, I'm trying to get him on as a guest as well, but I'm still puzzled by his entire mayoralship in Johannesburg. It seemed to go sideways. Now, some of that's not his fault. It was a coalition. I get that. But he also made allusions to the fact that the DA is a racist party. At least that was how the press reported. I'm not going to speak for Herman Mashaba unless I have a chance to come on. But this nonsense, this racialism, this constant obsession with race, which seems to be in the media and from the ANC, of course, and the EFF, that goes without saying. It really is caustic. It's acidic to South Africa's social cohesion. And the DA isn't a party of the whites, is it? And did I get something wrong here? Please, I'm going to go on for an hour. I have to stop myself and give you a chance to respond. So I'll just ask the question. Is the DA a party of whites?
Well, Chris, I sit as a deputy federal chairperson, and this is my third term in the federal executive of the Democratic Alliance. I served under Mmusi's leadership. I'm now serving with John as the leader. To give you an idea of our constitutional mandate, if John is not there, Dr. Ivan Meyer is the acting leader. If he's not there, I become the acting leader of the Democratic Alliance. Mmusi found me in the Democratic Alliance. He's left me. All the people you're mentioning have pretty much found me in the DA and have left me there. I think if the analogy I normally use when I talk to people is, if a child comes, you raise a child in your house, and a child doesn't want to toe the line of your rules in your house and they feel they're adult enough, they're welcome to go and start their own home where they can set up their own rules. In the DA, we have our own rules. We all have our own regulations. You have to abide by your sense of association with Democratic Alliance means you choose to align with the values and the rules of the organization. If you are not able to align with them, then by all means, remember the South African Constitution said this freedom of association. you're free to go and start your own political party or go and affiliate with a different organization. But the question I would even ask people to say, if Musi left because he said Herman was leaving, have anybody ever asked themselves why the two of them are not together in the same organization today?
Oh, shots fired. That's a good question. Nobody asked that question. You just asked the most poignant question. Exactly. If he left because
I'm
Herman...
actually putting it out there as a rhetorical question.
No.
I'm not saying it should be answered, but if two people leave claiming the ANC, the DA is racist, wouldn't they have formed a more formidable team working together? Why have they formed their own political parties?
Well, exactly. Well, neither one of us will answer that question because it's a rhetorical question, but I think we both have our own views on why they're doing it. So we'll leave it there.
But I'm still in the Democratic Alliance. There's a lot of Black leaders in the Democratic Alliance that are still remaining. We're still true to cause because we understand what the DA stands for. And yes, in the DA, there's no party that's perfect. But when I didn't join the DA because of a person, I joined the party because of what it stood for. I understood liberalism and the fact that your individual rights are sacrosanct. And those were what were appealing to me. Not Helen, not Tony Leon, none of them. Those are humans that come in. They will die and leave the Democratic Alliance here. I will die and leave the Democratic Alliance for my children and other people to come on board. And I hope those that come in and join the Democratic Alliance tomorrow come in because they see what I saw in the Democratic Alliance, which is the belief in the policies and the values of the organization. And they're drawn to those things, not the human beings in the organization. Yes, you must work with human beings, but the primary attraction for me into the Democratic Alliance as a Black woman in South Africa was what the party stands for, the values of the organization, and the policies that the party have, which are aligned to liberalism. And ultimately, when I see the world and where I think the party is going, and I think right now, if I can talk from a national point of view, we've aligned our policies to the sustainable goals, the global sustainable goals, which is easier to attract investors into South Africans because we're saying we want to play in the global space. I don't think any other party has done that. So the more I engage in leadership and I'm privy to these things, and guess what? We workshop these even with the public to say, you're welcome to comment on our policies and see where we're going. We believe, for example, our economic justice policy is far more powerful than what ANC has done with the broad-based economic empowerment, because economic justice talks about when you say Black people, not all Black people are the same. I'm talking to you on a laptop. I've got fellow Black people who live in a shack who do not have the same privilege I have of a laptop. Are you going to address our needs the same way? No, because using the word Black is very vague. You need to start broadening and say, in order to emancipate me economically, what do I need to look at the person? So if I'm looking at a person in an informal settlement, maybe that person doesn't want to share a toilet with 500 other people or a tap. They actually might need running water, a house, and something else. I've already got a house. If you want to emancipate me, maybe you need to look at something different to bring the solutions to me. So having something that just calls it Black economic empowerment, it actually only benefited the cadres. Mm-hmm. So we are saying, even if you look at the spectrum of this country, we have Blacks, we've got colors, we've got whites, we've got Indians, which are actually poor today. Emancipation of those people economically has to be done by looking at everybody's individual circumstances. You can't just define people by race and saying you're addressing a problem. And we have never divorced ourselves from understanding the pain and the history of South Africa under apartheid. But look at 27 years. There are those who've benefited. In fact, if you look at the growth of the middle class in South Africa, the gap between that and the low class is broad. So if you're starting to say we only have one solution of one Black, it's not the right way to go.
Absolutely. I have to agree with you. And if we look at the policies of the African National Congress over the last 27 years, all they've accomplished is enriching a patronage network and the cadres. Beyond that, virtually no South Africans, Black, white, or brown, have really made much headway in this. And we see millions and millions and millions more of South Africans living in abject poverty today than we did in 1994. and most of them are black. Not all, but most of them are black. There's others, but that's the reality. A few months back, I heard Cyril Ramaphosa say that Bantu education was worse than no education at all, to which I'd have to agree. I think the ANC's Bantu education standards are worse than no education at all. 30% in 2 subjects to pass the matric to get into university. I don't want the engineer who got 30 on his maths being the person that builds a bridge I have to drive over every day.
Well, try getting a surgeon operating on you who got 30%.
Exactly. I mean, this is listen. I not to rail on them and not to put you in position, but it's my program, so I'm going to rail for a second to take the host privilege. It's absolutely disgusting and obnoxious that the ANC has continued to lower the standards and reduce the quality of life and education for South Africans in general, but especially for Black South Africans. Things for many Black South Africans, honestly, for people who are rejected, are far worse than they were in 1994. Now, many Black South Africans, things are better. People have rights. They have recourse now, but employment, but and they've delivered homes, but that was 15 years ago. That isn't the last 15 years. They haven't done any of that stuff for the most part in the last 15 years. And the education, I think, is the worst part. If you want to lift economic empowerment, you have to educate people. They have to have skills. They have to be literate. They have to be able to function in a modern society. We keep seeing the ANC talk about space programs and talk about advanced AI and this stuff when you got kids who can't even read and write in their first language. It's vile, and I'm sorry, it's a little editorial on my part there, but I think when you talk about economic empowerment, you got to start with education, and then you got to go from there and create a level playing field so that everybody has a fair opportunity. It doesn't mean equal opportunity. What I mean by that is that some people are born in circumstances where they have an advantage, others are not. But what you do is you try to find a way to balance that as best as possible. And the ANC's approach does nothing but enrich their friends and their colleagues and their little patronage puppies. That's it. All right, that's my soapbox. I'll give you a chance to get in there if you want. Or we could...
No. I think you're talking exactly to our economic justice policy. And the analogy of that is if you had 2 people of different heights watching soccer over a fence, and you give them both a crate, the other person is still taller than the other person.
Exactly.
What you need to give
exactly.
give the shorter person 2 crates and the taller person 1 crate. That's how you look at the fairness of what's required. So
yeah, exactly. That's a good analogy. Listen, the conversation we're having, I'm fascinated by it, and I have to say this. I mean, it obviously shouldn't come as a shock to you. It's a compliment, but you're very well informed. You seem very well aware of the issues. You've served in Ekurhuleni. You've been there. If you can figure this out, why can't the ANC? I mean, they have the levers of power.
Common sense is not always common.
Ooh.
That's my answer to you.
Well,
I know it sounds like an insult, but no. I'm being honest.
No.
I'll tell you a small thing. When I heard the suburb that had no power for a week because there was no fuses in store, I remembered a job I'd done immediately after varsity, and I thought, what the hell am I going to do with this job? But the reality of that job, there's never any training you don't use later in life. I started a job as a trainee planner, and the reality of being a planner was learning how to stock management for stores. And today, I'm using that lesson from that job that I thought was useless to me when I was about 19, 20. And I'm thinking, how does anybody not understand that you don't have to wait until there's no fuses in stock to use? Because I used to say, if I'm selling 100 men's chains a month in all my stores, then I must keep 110 to 120. That should be my standard store complement. And then when there's Father's Day, obviously your usage goes up. So you look at the months where you consume more electricity and you need more components. So for example, winter, when people have heaters and other things, then you would have more components because the likelihood of things bursting and fuses, et cetera, would be higher. And I'm not an engineer, Chris. I'm just a logical thinker here who thinks we need to get back to basics. And that's how my mind is constructed.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100% there. It's interesting how we take things from life and we put them in our kit, our toolbox, and later on we find them very useful. As a young officer, I went to teach officer training at a state university at Iowa State engineering school, and so I taught ROTC. That's a reserve officer training corps where we developed 3/4 of our Army officers. So I went there to teach for a couple of years, and my boss was like, "You should get a master's degree while you're here." I'm like, "I'm kind of busy." He's like, "Get a master's degree." So I came on the program, and they didn't have anything on Africa because that was my interest and my focus. This was in 1995. So I came up with a degree that focused on international political economy, and then community and regional planning and cultural anthropology. 3 things which have served me brilliantly in life. You're not going to find many Army officers that have a background in community and regional planning. So when you talk about these things, they resonate with me very well. You can't just, not invest money into maintenance and upkeep, because then you get a backlog. And that's what we have now. I mean, even if the DA takes over with 50+1.
We've got over a 20-year backlog in infrastructure in Ekurhuleni.
So there you go.
In some cases up to 50 years, because the reality, Ekurhuleni, ANC built nothing really new in terms of infrastructure. They only inherited the apartheid infrastructure, which had the reserves. We've now depleted the reserves. We've built nothing new.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have to start, as the Democratic Alliance, come into office and actually start rebuilding the backlog, and then start building the reserves as well. So we've got something to give to our children tomorrow.
I can't disagree with you on that. You're absolutely spot on that. It's just absolutely crazy. Hey, let's turn the clock back a little bit if you don't mind. Okay, let's do that. Okay, so apartheid officially comes to an end in 1994, but they started dismantling a lot of legislation in the late 80s, especially 1992. But by 1994, 27 April 1994, Rainbow Nation, there's the elections. You're a young lady, and you're coming of age at that time. I think you probably were in high school around then, yes?
Yes, 1994, I was 17.
There you go. So can you take us back there? We'll get with Sherman, Mr. Peabody, and the Wayback Machine. We'll go back with the DeLorean there with Marty McFly and go back to 1994. Can you remember, what were your thoughts back then? Because, I mean, you have memories of an apartheid era. I mean, it was less as you were a teenager, but as a young girl, you probably experienced this in the 80s. So as 1994 rolled around, what were your thoughts and dreams and hopes for South Africa? Or were you even worried about that? Or are you just like, I just want to get to school. I want to do something. I want to move. I want to get out of the house, because a lot of young men and women just want to get away from the house when they're that age. But can you remember back to the time? What was it like for you? And what were your hopes for the future, if that is germane?
Well, I did want to get out of the house because I've always wanted to be I always wanted to be independent. Chris, I grew up in Pretoria, and I went to UCT because it was the furthest I could afford to go from my family. I couldn't afford to take a gap year.
That's Cape Town for my international audience.
Yes, University of Cape Town. But bringing back to a harder reality, my mom went to Cuba. And when she came back from Cuba in 1990, she couldn't come to South Africa because she was considered to be a communist military medicine student. And she was kept in a prison cell while waiting for a connecting flight to Lesotho, because my father is actually from Lesotho. So I've had my fair share of, I can't say I've experienced apartheid like my parents have, but I remember being the first black tennis player for Pretoria High School for girls. And we went to play a high school. I wouldn't mention it by name because times have changed and I don't want to embarrass them today. And they wouldn't play the team because I was a black tennis player. But I had a coach who had foresight and decided if I can't play, the whole team won't play. So we got back on the school bus and went back to school. So it was declared a walkover. But that was the reality of that time. And I've had so many experiences. I mean, my dad bought us a flat in Sunnyside, Pretoria. And because we were first black family to live in that area, people thought my mother's boss,
domestic.
my mother was domestic work, and the boss were kind enough to send me to Pretoria Girls High. I couldn't in the CBD of Pretoria find a hair salon to do my hair. I mean, there's a lot of little quirks of my life. People thought it was funny that I was even playing tennis because you didn't find black people that could play tennis. I would skate with my white friends from school, and I thought that was funny that a black girl could even go on the ice rink. So I can't say I've experienced apartheid. I think the closest to me was the day we were rejected from that tennis game. And I could imagine, I wondered how my colleagues felt because I didn't know whether they supported the teacher's view and would have wanted to play, or what the case would have been. And I felt I'd let down the team by being black.
Ah, shame.
And yet I was, because you don't know whether, as other players, maybe they might have wanted to play the league and want me to sit it out, or how they really felt, Yeah. But I'm grateful for my teacher to have taught my peers the lesson at such an early age, that it's a Rainbow Nation school and that's what it's going to be. all or nothing.
Well,
So
as you were going out of school, and we were approaching a new era with a multiracial democracy and moving forward, what were you hoping for then? Like you just want to get to the house, as you said, because all kids want to get away. But did you have any thoughts of the future or what life was going to be like, or whether there be changes, or it wasn't something you're focused on?
I think because I went to study political philosophy, I started becoming politically aware at a very young age. And I mean, as soon as I got to University of Cape Town, I started studying politics, local government, international relations. So unlike other students maybe who had gone to engineering but were not very political aware, that's why I joined South African Liberal Students Association when I turned 18 at varsity. So I think I'm a bit different in the sense that when you study politics and you have to research and look at all the real life cases, you become very aware what racism and apartheid meant for South Africa, and still chose a non-racial South Africa even after studying everything.
Well, that's interesting you say that. The thing for me is, it's I think naive to think that we can move from one thing to another without a transition period that may last some time. And I think many of us recognize that it would take some time. But for me, from what I've seen, and of course I don't live in South Africa, and I've not lived there. I've lived in Botswana nearby, and of course all over the continent. But for me, in the many, many hundreds of times I've been to South Africa, it seems to me that in many respects, in the last 15 years, we've gone backwards. It's certainly in the media, certainly with the ANC. It's all going backwards, and it's honestly, Refiloe, it's very disheartening to me. At times I'm heartbroken because I saw 20 years ago, 15 years ago, South Africans mingling and getting together and doing things, and it was refreshing. A lot of stuff. For instance, if you're in Gaborone and you're a white man with a black woman, or even a white woman with a black man, nobody even notices. You go to a restaurant, you go somewhere. But if you go in parts of South Africa, people won't say anything, but people will stare and look at you. And there was a time when that seemed to be lessening, and now it's coming back. And that's just a small example of what I'm talking about. But it seems as if South Africa is going backwards, and for me, it's heartbreaking. I mean, do you think that, that's a very big generalization, but do you think that I'm missing this, or is there some truth to it?
No. I think it's quite true. I think in my first job, my second job really, I dated a white guy who was half Italian, half Afrikaans. And I remember going into one of the, takeaway shops. And he went to order, and I was standing at the table. And these beautiful white girls came in, and they were eyeing him out because he was quite a good looking guy. But immediately they saw he was with me. The stares were almost like they looked at him with disgust that he was with me. So, it is. But I think the other side of it, which is more painful for me today, is when I work in the townships of South Africa and Black people say to me, Refiloe, we were better during apartheid because we had jobs. We could feed our families. Yes, we still had apartheid, which was painful. But it's almost like ANC is now oppressed us even more than what the apartheid government did, because today we don't even have the freedom to provide for families. For a mother to go home and not be able to even put bread on the table, I'm telling you, Chris, it's the most heartbreaking thing you could ever see. It's not imaginable. I think the dreams that people had in 1994 of liberation, they understood liberation as would be emancipated from apartheid. We would have economic emancipation. So we've left apartheid behind, but the freedom part, financial and economic, has not happened, has not followed. So now, if anything, we've got more youth queuing for grants versus queuing for jobs. And the tax base is shrinking. It has become impossible to live in this country. It has become painful to be a South African, a Black South African at that. Because when you look at what a grant gives you, if you have a child and you get 450 grant, just to give you an idea what your grocery basket would look like, because 450 grant for a child, you would buy Pampers for 250, The milk is another 200. There goes the 450. What else do you feed the rest of the family with?
Well, the whole thing is just absolutely ridiculous. I find it shocking because I see the ANC proud of the fact that, they were talking earlier, this many people gotten SASSA grants and this many people gotten grants. You add it up, it's half the population of South Africa more that is receiving state assistance. That's not something to be proud of. That's something to be ashamed of. But
Correct.
It's terrible. I mean, it's like here in America, Barack Obama's all excited that we have 50 million Americans on food stamps. I'm embarrassed by that. And that figure was lowered, not because people were denied food stamps, but because they got dignified jobs in a growing economy and they can feed their families and be responsible. I mean, it's the logic of this.
But when you've got jobs, you're increasing the people that contribute to the tax base.
It's that too.
When you've got more people queuing for grants, you've decreased the number of people contributing to the economy and actually contributing to the tax base.
Absolutely.
At some stage, it will be unsustainable to have so many people on the grants.
Well, it's already unsustainable. The country's bankrupt.
We're also losing the richer South Africans. The billionaires who contribute they're gone.
Yep.
So those who are contributing, but in terms of how much the individual person is still contributing, is getting less. So we need to build more industrialists, more people who can contribute big amounts into the tax base. Mm-hmm. So when you're losing billionaires out of the system and you've got a shrinking tax base, so it's the quality and the quantity shrinking, you are really in trouble as a country. And if ANC doesn't see it, I don't know who's going to see it. And I'm not an economist, but I can tell you, we can see, this country was already downgraded twice. Ekurhuleni is also downgraded already. So it is more expensive to repay our loans than what it is to actually operate. We cannot afford to have a shrinking tax base. We need to get an economy that's stimulated, where we can get investors, we can get people working, not queuing for grants, who are able to. And I'm not saying there's no place for grants. The elderly, the disabled, who are absolutely unable to work, those are the people that should be queuing for grants. But if we got more people working, we might even make the grants even a bigger amount, so that those people who queue for grants queue for decent grants.
Well, I'll tell you, it's South Africa, and this is not an insult to South Africa, it's just a matter of fact for someone that does investment and is involved in getting investment, especially to Africa, is that South Africa has a number of challenges. It's already a costly place to do business from the following standpoints. Security. You have to have lots of security. You have to pay for security because of cash in transit heists, because of robberies. So security is a higher concern there and costs much more than it does in many other places. Then you have the unreliability of the power grid. The power grid going down all the time, damaging your equipment. So you have to have backup generators. You have to use diesel to run those things. It's that's incredibly expensive. Build the infrastructure for that. Then the reality that the South African workforce is very uneven and as a whole is not particularly productive. It's one of the least productive workforces in the developed world because it's not an entirely developed country. So you get varying degrees. You get some very high productivity in part of the workforce, and that's not race dependent. That's across the board. And then you get very low productivity in other places. All of that makes South Africa a difficult place to do business. Then on top of that, the corruption that takes place, the tax evasion, the bribes that take place. And then on top of that, you've got this moronic expropriation without compensation thing, which is not dead, despite what people are saying. It's before the parliament now. It's unlikely it'll pass, but if the EFF changes his mind, it will amend the Constitution. All they need to do is change their mind and play along, and it will become the law of the land. So I, as a foreign investor, I'm not going to put my money into South Africa right now when there's a very real possibility that just like in the security sector where they just signed legislation, which means you have to divest 51% of your company, give it to people based on their skin pigmentation. I find that unbelievably racist and bigotry. That's what Zimbabwe did. They had the indigenization policy. And it's Zimbabwe, the indigenization policy meant you had to give it to black Zimbabweans. So the few thousand Bushmen that live there, they can't get it because they're not black Zimbabweans. The mixed race Zimbabweans can't get it because they're not black Zimbabweans.
It's another form of racism, Chris.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry to say.
It is.
But I want to talk about this expropriation without compensation.
Sure.
I, obviously, as a deputy federal chair, also engaged quite a lot of ambassadors. We had a company that wanted to invest in Ekurhuleni. And the ambassador from this particular country said to me, with all the power outages, water outages, expropriation without compensation, even our Home Affairs regulations, which were literally saying, if you bring in your company in and your executives come in, obviously you want to have you look at your business interests. When they go home in December, the guarantees of them coming back in January are not guaranteed. So this company said it's actually a high risk for us to do business in South Africa. We'd rather go to Mozambique. So the opportunity for Ekurhuleni to get 3,000 jobs was lost to Mozambique. Where we could have started to do a big dent in this 39% unemployment rate. It's things like that that make people, that actually deter investors from coming to this municipality, plus the national issues on home affairs and expropriation without compensation. That's why we are fighting it tooth and nail in Parliament to say, we know we've got 80 members of Parliament in the Democratic Alliance, and there's a couple of other parties that support us, but it cannot pass because we're already on our knees. If we want South Africa to be completely lying flat, implement that constitutional amendment. I promise you, then we're dead as a country.
Well, and the other piece of this, too, that's lost on people, and I've said this from the outset because I've talked about this for a long time, is that the concept of expropriation without compensation is incredibly dangerous because it gives the state unchecked powers to steal from anybody. And how will that be used by the government of the day? Whatever the political party is, as a way to silence opposition. The moment you start speaking out about the government's misdeeds or your opinion, they will threaten to take your property, which isn't just land. People get lost. They think it's about farmland. That's part of it. But property is your stocks, your bonds, your jewelry, your bookies, your cars, your homes.
And intellectual property as well. Please put that on the list.
Yep, intellectual property
as well. I was
well.
actually talking to some taxi owners during the campaign trail. I said, do you know that your taxi is also property?
Yep.
So you're going to lose your livelihood. But even in the argument around land is then all citizens will potentially become tenants of the state. Which state? The ANC state, run state.
Yep.
And that is a disaster waiting to happen. If you want to see a volcano erupting, imagine if the ANC is so corrupt now, imagine being their tenants and losing your property. But particularly to people who, like me, are bondholders, where we pay a mortgage, you will still have to pay that mortgage even though you've lost your property.
Exactly.
And people don't realize the risk that comes with this thing.
Well, if they start confiscating farmland, they're going to destroy the financial sector because farmers typically are heavily indebted because they have to buy new machinery all the time, new seed, and some years they have good years, some years they have bad years. So they perpetually are in debt, even if they're making a profit and they just pay down the debt. And by taking away their collateral, then they can't borrow money anymore. And see, this is the thing I talk about all the time, Refiloe, and that is that if the ANC was serious about economic development in South Africa and uplifting, especially black South Africans, why haven't they issued title deed to all of the RDP housing, to all the people who occupy them? You would create billions of dollars of capital instantly. Instead, you have dead capital, which the state controls to keep people in serfdom. Because if you gave them that, let's say I want to start a tuck shop. I live in an informal settlement. I want to start a tuck shop. If I have title deed to my home, I can go to a bank and say, look, I have collateral. I have this home. I have this land.
Collateral,
I have this land. So the bank would be more inclined, if I had a decent business plan and maybe a history of being a well-behaved citizen, they go, you know what? We're going to give you that 2,000 or that 10,000 Rand loan. All right, here's the terms. Here's 10,000 Rand. And then I have collateral against it. I go out, I start my tuck shop or my spaza shop, and I start making money. And I generate revenue, and maybe I hire a person to work for me. And all that capital is freed up. Right now, it's dead capital.
But also, you'd be more inclined to pay back your loan and more inclined to make sure your business succeeds because you know that you don't want to lose your property.
Exactly. They'll take your home away if you don't pay your mortgage. Exactly right.
So there's such an incentive that the spillover is so much bigger than just at your business.
Yeah.
It's an incentive for you to work hard to make sure that business is a success, because you know that if you don't succeed, you're not only going to lose the bank loan, you're going to be in ITC, registered with the credit bureau, but also you're going to lose your home and that ownership of land.
Well, I think what we're seeing now is the collapse of the ANC's 20-year model, not the liberation era and the voting, but I'm talking for the last 20 years, the ANC's model has been to, in my view, enslave and push people into serfdom, making them dependent on state grants, making them dependent on RDP housing. But if you don't deliver services, then that model can't sustain itself. Now we see that today in 2021, where they've made people depend on the state, and $30 a month, 450 Rand, or $23 with 350 Rand from a SASSA grant, No one can live off of that. That's absolutely insane. You can't live off of that in the Central African Republic, let alone South Africa. It's absolutely crazy. And it's just crazy. Let me get to a couple things in chat here very quickly because we're going to have to wrap up soon. Brett Sessom gave a super chat earlier. He said, leaking sewage equals sick and dangerous. DA will fix it. Well, that sounds like certainly in Ekurhuleni, there's a plan to do it. Deba Moray, who's obviously a big supporter and fan of yours, says, because she said so many nice comments, said, DA ward councillor for Kempton and Glen Moray is fantastic. Marius DeVos, very informative, keeping people up to date. I assume you know who that is. I'm not familiar with him. Maybe we can get him on if he wants to come on before the election. And then just look, there's just so many very kind comments here. And listen, I got to tell you this. My audience, I'd say about a quarter of my audience is very not DA, very angry because of 2019, and even more people because of the Phoenix poster thing. So, I mean, that's a portion of my audience. Now, a lot of my audience is very pro-DA, but I mean, these are very about you and about who you are and what you have to say and how you present things. This is a very generous viewing audience today, so thank you all for that. I appreciate that. Some people were skeptical that I was bringing someone from the DA on my program. I would bring anyone from the DA on the program want to come on. I said, no, this lady's got it going on. We got to get her on here, and I was very fortunate to get you on. So it's people are, again, just really nice stuff to say. I don't know.
No, the honor is mine. I'm privileged to have been invited onto your show, Chris. Thank you very much.
No, you're very welcome, and I'm in danger here of becoming a supporter. You know, I got to be an objective journalist here. I can't jump from one side of the ship to the other. But listen,
well, my life is just getting back to basics and making sure common sense prevails.
Whoops! Did we get load shedding? We might have got load shedding there.
No, I think there's a thunderstorm brewing here in Ekurhuleni.
Okay, I thought we had load shedding.
That's why the connectivity is unstable.
No, see, that's one of the things about Eskom is that, you know, if you're late for something, it's load shedding, I couldn't get here, you know.
Well, you know, the funny thing, Chris, I've got kids who do online schooling because of the COVID pandemic. You can imagine having to invest, even alternative energy is very expensive. But whenever there's load shedding, then I have to switch my kids from laptops to tablets to stay in class because I chose for them to do online schooling. It just makes them more versatile and global children but you can imagine what load shedding does to us.
Oh, it's horrible. Paulie, who's a firefighter, Paulie said and he puts in all caps, one of the very best chats you've had. And Paulie's been watching my program for almost 2 years since I retired from active duty and was no longer a serving intelligence officer. I could actually say things in public. So he's been with me for a very long time. He's a good oak. And he says one of the very best chats you've had with like 4 exclamation points. My goodness, 3 or 4. He says, ma'am, you are a weapon. Go and change the country. Well, I don't know about the country, but certainly Ekurhuleni, we get her. Maybe she get a change.
Thank you, Polly.
Maybe she get that to change. And then
we'll start at Ekurhuleni. Hopefully, it will set a pavement. It will set a foundation for the DA for the national and provincial elections in 2024, because people will have tasted a little bit of the Democratic Alliance and what we can do for them when we are in government.
And what I would say to my audience who are skeptical, listen to candidates, listen to Refiloe, listen to hear what she has to say, give people a chance. Don't carry the baggage of the past. Even if you're looking at the ANC, you can't help but carry the baggage of the past because every day it's another day, another scandal. So you have to make an exception for the ANC. But with the other parties, listen to what they've got to say. You know, don't make a judgment based on something that was in the past. Parties change over time, one way or another, and sometimes for better, sometimes worse. But the DAs definitely appears that they're trying very hard. They've clearly picked a solid candidate for this municipality. I tried to get John Steenhuisen on my program. I probably waited too late to get him on a couple months ago. He's already prepping for the campaign. So the people around him said, not right now. So I couldn't get him on. But if I'd had him on, I would have to say that whatever decision was reached, whether it's by the national executive or it's by him or whoever had the influence, I think they made the right choice in getting you out there to be the candidate for this municipality. And I wish you all the best. And I don't usually say this, but I do hope that you actually win in Ekurhuleni. Next time I'm at OR Tambo, maybe I could come by and we can have a good Joel and a little bride going on there.
You're welcome, Chris. Well, even if whatever happens, but I know that on the 2nd, I'll be the mayoress of Ekurhuleni because this municipality needs me, not even me. I'm just a figurehead for the Democratic Alliance, but I think they need the DA difference here. It's time people actually got service delivery. They might be shocked at what service delivery actually looks like, because for too long they've taken such a mediocrity as the norm, that when they get something that somebody that actually believes in proper service delivery, it might be a shock for them, to be honest.
A shock to the system. They're just not accustomed to it. That's why I say, in many respects, it'll take so very little to open eyes and turn the corner. And then it'll be a hard road after that. But just the initial stuff, the quick wins like you talked about. Some really good comments before we wrap up. Then I'm going to give you a last chance to get a comment in here and say what you'd like to say to wrap it up. Janet Liddy, who is American in South Carolina, says, I think South Africa's lucky to have this lady. I just came on to give the stream a like, and I've listened to the whole thing. She only came on because she's a loyal viewer and was just going to like it. Then she got stuck here because it was engaging. So, and then Etienne Ronnie says, can't wait for Refiloe to take over Ekurhuleni. So needed. Don't live there, but do work there. Okay, there you go. That's cool. So whether you live there or not, you work there, you're affected by what happens. So that's pretty cool. And Paulie says, she gives me so much hope for the country. And with that, Refiloe, I'm going to give you an opportunity here to share any last thoughts or comments you might have for us. Also, you are welcome back on the program at any time. Next weekend, I intend to do all day coverage except for when the Springboks are on. I'll go to my other channel and do commentary for the because I'm a rugby guy. So for their test match, but for the whole weekend, afternoon, evening, your time, I'll be doing coverage of the elections, inviting candidates back on for, not an hour and a half, but 10 minutes, 15 minutes, just pop on, tell us how the campaign's going and give us updates. Throughout the day, I'll be doing analysis of wards that I think are places where parties can win and in the cities and municipalities. So I intend to do all weekend coverage next week. I'm going to be pretty knackered come Monday, but then I don't have to vote on Monday. You do. I vote on Tuesday here in the States. So I'll give you a chance to share anything you'd like to share with us. Thank you very much.
Chris, thank you very much for having me on. I'm actually voting on Saturday, because I've applied for a special vote.
Okay.
So I can go on the campaign trail and greet voters if they do special voting, including the Monday. I like to go to not all of them, but as many as possible of the voting stations, that to encourage our voters when they come in to vote and know that I'm with them. But the most important thing, I think, for me to say to your viewers is, I think our country needs a change, and it needs a change where people will actually do competent stuff and ensure that people get service delivery. I have an opportunity, as I've said, to immigrate if I really wanted to, but I'm here because I took a vow to serve this country. And I was asked already in 2011 to be a mayoral candidate, but chose not and lost that. And I'm glad I lost that time because I wasn't quite ready. But now in 2021, when I was asked to stand as a mayoral candidate, I really believe that I'm ready. And I must say, I proudly also put a master's under my belt in policy development and practice, which basically looks at policies and its impact on the ground. So I don't want to have a clean audit where people still live in squalor, but I want to one day have a clean audit where people say, we know what that clean audit means. I've got water in my house. I don't have to share a tap with 500 other people. When I take out my rubbish, it's removed on the day they say it will be removed. I want to make sure that the finances of this municipality are kept under control, under tight control. If there's a budget for a power station is built. When right now, the CAPEX budget is not at the level that it needs to. If I give you an example, Chris, 250 million went back to Treasury because the ANC failed to build houses. And yet we've got a mushrooming of informal settlements from 119 to 125. It is a crime to return money to Treasury. When I was in the corporate sector, I was taught if you're not using finances, it means you're actually not doing your job. So we must make sure that we build houses, even if it means renovating hostels into not the apartheid system hostels, but renovate them into family units so man and his wife can live together as a family. Let's do that. But I really have hope, and I'm passionate about Ekurhuleni. I've lived here for 21 years. I've got 3 boys. I'm a single mom. And I want my kids to be proud of my legacy that I'm going to live for them tomorrow. Because what I want to say, and the reality is, this is what I've said to my boys. When people think of Black politicians across the continent of Africa, we think of corrupt individuals. I want to be that one person who stands up. In fact, the way I tell my boys is one day when you bury me, I want my tombstone to say, my mom stood for excellence in government. And I want to turn around that perception that all Black politicians are corrupt. And that's the message I'd like to leave you with, Chris, and your audience.
Well, Refiloe, having lived all across the continent, Tunisia, Liberia, Botswana, Malawi, Nigeria, Mauritania, Uganda, and Ethiopia, I can say that sadly, the image inside of Africa and outside of Africa with black politicians far too often is that they are corrupt and thieving. It's not true in many cases, but it's certainly the image. And it's a great ideal that you have to aspire to be remembered as a person that was honest and delivered for the people. And that's brilliant. So thank you so much, Kia Laboa, bye bye donkey. Thank you for coming on the program. You're welcome back on, and I'm going to be singing your praises. It was a brilliant conversation. That's why I call it the Indaba Conversation with Chris, because it's not an interview, it's a conversation, a chance to share thoughts and tease some things out. So best of luck to the Democratic Alliance in Ekurhuleni, and best of luck to you. And hopefully we can touch base with you next week, maybe on the weekend, and see how things are going.
Thanks. I've had fun, Chris. Good night.
All right. Cheers. All right, folks. That's the candidate right there. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Let me put her in the waiting room. I've got there. She dropped off on her own. She's a pro. She knows what she's doing. Thank you so much. I've got another interview in 4 minutes, so I've got to get off here and get ready for Todd Clever, USA rugby legend. 76 caps, the most capped ever Eagle in U.S. rugby history. 24 appearances as a sevens player. Gave him 100 times he wore the USA uniform in the United States. I have him on here in about 4 minutes, assuming that he gets his connection at the airport lounge where he's at. And my thank you, very deep thank you to Refiloe Nt'sekhe, who came on the program. She is the mayoral candidate for the Democratic Alliance for the municipality, or metropolitan, I should say, of Ekurhuleni, a city of 3.4 million people. You may know it because Germiston and Boksburg and Kempton Park and OR Tambo, all located right there in that city. So thanks a lot, folks. Be sure to smash the like button. If you're not a subscriber to Chris White after you just tuned in for the first time, hit that subscription button. It costs you absolutely nothing. And for those of you who got a little bit of patience and want to check out a really cool living rugby legend from this side of the Atlantic, stay tuned and join me in a few minutes. Hopefully I've got him. If we have a snafu, I'll let you know, but we'll see you here shortly because I haven't had a chance to link up with him because I've been on the air. All right, folks, that's it. Take care, and appreciate you watching this continuing coverage of South Africa's 2021 municipal elections. This is Chris in Central Pennsylvania. Thank you so much. I'm trying to find my exit video here. I have a hard time doing it. And there it is. Cheers.